October 15th, 1877, 4:47 p.m. Gray haze drifted between the ponderosa trunks, like restless spirits threading through the northern reaches of Red Butte, Wyoming territory. The late afternoon sun slanted through the canopy at that precise angle that turned every pine needle into burnished copper, casting long shadows that danced with each gust of wind. The air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter, and something else, the acrid tang of spent gunpowder that made the wildlife fall silent. Maddow crouched behind a massive windfall, his 25 years having taught him to read the forest's warnings like sacred text. The Lakota warrior called Bear pressed his palm against the damp earth, feeling vibrations that spoke of heavy boots and deliberate pursuit. Today, the wilderness whispered of violence. Pine needles exploded from a branch 3 feet above his head as a rifle crack echoed up the mountainside. The wet slap of lead against bark was followed immediately by a woman's sharp cry of pain. Someone was hunting, and they were closing fast. He found her collapsed against the base of a lichen-scarred pine, her pale chemise torn and darkened with mud and crimson stains. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, with wheat-colored hair escaping from a bun that had surrendered to the wilderness. Her breathing came in shallow, rapid gasps, and her blue eyes fixed on him with terror and desperate hope. "Bitte, please," she whispered, her accent thick with German inflection. "Don't leave me here to die." Another shot cracked through the forest, closer this time. Bark exploded inches from her wounded shoulder, showering them both with splinters. Maddow moved, without conscious thought, scooping her up and dragging her behind the protective bulk of the fallen log as boots crashed through the underbrush below. The rhythm of the gunfire told him everything about their pursuer. These shots came slow, deliberate, methodical, each one placed with the careful precision of a man who enjoyed prolonging the hunt. "My name is Greta," she managed, clutching a worn leather satchel to her chest. "Greta Hartman. Whatever happens, don't let them take this." The satchel felt wrong in his hands, heavier than any lady's bag should be, with hard edges that suggested rolled papers and metal objects that clinked softly. Through the worn leather, he could feel pressed botanical specimens and something that crackled like expensive parchment. Boot prints in the damp forest loam told Maddow exactly who was tracking them. The distinctive horseshoe-shaped repair on the left heel was unmistakable, and beside it, the strange double impression of a man who favored his dominant hand, except that hand was no longer flesh and bone. Iron Hand Mackenzie. The bounty hunter had earned his nickname from the crude brass prosthetic that replaced his right hand lost to Confederate grapeshot at Chancellorsville. Mackenzie had a reputation for finishing contracts with a single shot to the head, clean and professional. But today his pursuit seemed personal, almost leisurely, like a cat playing with wounded prey. Maddow shouldered the mysterious satchel and lifted Greta, surprised by how light she felt, hollowed out by whatever hardships had brought her to this wilderness. As he moved deeper into the timber, the scent of burning brush began to drift through the trees. The hunter was using fire to drive them like game, combining the approaching storm with controlled burns to funnel them toward a killing ground. Above the ridgeline, clouds the color of old iron gathered with the promise of the season's first blizzard. Greta's fingers clamped onto his buckskin shirt as another bullet split bark above their heads. Maddow instinctively sheltered her with his body, feeling her rapid heartbeat against his ribs. When the shooting paused, he bound her wound with strips torn from his sleeve. "Hold on to me," he whispered, his palm resting gently on her uninjured shoulder. The look that passed between them carried volumes, half apology for the rough handling ahead, half command to find the strength to survive. She nodded, once jaw set against the pain, and he recognized the steel beneath her frightened exterior. This woman would not break easily. The wind rose with a howl that bent the pines, driving sleet through the canopy with the force of thrown needles. Somewhere behind them, Iron Hand Mackenzie methodically reloaded his Winchester and continued his patient stalking, following their trail with grim determination. October 15, 1877, 6:23 p.m. Matto carried scars deeper than the ones marking his weathered hands and angular face. The previous summer at Little Bighorn, he had cradled his dying cousin Tashunka while the 7th Cavalry's trumpets screamed retreat across the Montana grassland. Later, he had smothered a prairie fire with his bare hands to hide wounded warriors, the acrid haze burning his lungs. The memory had driven him from the reservation, away from endless councils, where old men debated treaties written by liars. Now, he traveled alone, living by his grandmother's teachings, which roots would staunch bleeding, which bark could break fever, which leaves ground into paste could draw poison from infected wounds. He avoided mining towns and trusted few white men, preferring the honest hostility of wilderness to the false promises of civilization. His parfleche contained eagle bone needles for stitching packets of willow bark powder and dried bearberry leaves that could ease the burning of infected cuts. Greta Hartman had arrived in this unforgiving country by a different path, but one no less stained with loss. 3 months earlier, she had been the wife of Klaus Hartmann, a German immigrant who worked the played-out silver claims around Ember Ridge. Klaus had died when rotted timber gave way in the Prosperity mine, crushing him beneath tons of worthless rock. She had survived the brutal mountain summer in the abandoned mining camp, living in a ghost town kitchen with newspapers stuffed into a broken window, trading herbal remedies for flour and beans from occasional freight wagons. Her hands bore the calluses of hard work, gathering plants, grinding roots, building fires with green wood that filled her eyes with tears, but provided necessary heat. The leather satchel never left her side, containing her life's knowledge, careful botanical sketches, drawn with pencils worn to stubs, pressed specimens of wild lettuce and mountain ash, detailed notes in her precise European script. She had learned fragments of Cheyenne and Lakota plant names from an elderly market woman in St. Louis, recording everything from proper moon phases for harvesting prickly pear to the exact elevation where blue star flowers grew their petals, containing alkaloids that could dull pain more effectively than laudanum. Their world existed in the shadow of Red Butte's mining district, where a Union Pacific spur fed ore wagons and mine owner Horace Lyle extracted profits from increasingly barren claims. The town squatted in the valley like weathered bones, its single street lined with buildings that had seen better days during the Silver Rush. Among residents who had chosen conscience over profit stood Dr. Edwin Pike, a 40-year-old physician whose steady hands and empty medicine cabinet told the story of missing supply shipments. The former Army surgeon had arrived from New Hampshire with federal credentials, only to discover that medical supplies ordered through official channels vanished between the railroad depot and his clinic. Nora Talbot taught miners' children during daylight and ran evening classes for their mothers, her one-room schoolhouse lit by candle stubs and heated by a wood stove that consumed more hope than fuel. At 30, she possessed the fierce determination of a woman who believed education could break generational chains of poverty trapping families in company towns. Silas Boone worked 40 acres of clay bottomland beside the creek, his fields producing more optimism than crops, his ancient mule pulling more kindness than profit from reluctant earth. The 50-year-old widower had buried beloved wife Martha the previous winter, and now lived for small acts of human decency that prevented their community from sliding into moral darkness. Standing against them was Deputy Cal Boyd, whose badge served whoever offered highest compensation, and Iron Hand Mackenzie, who worked from shadows for Horace Lyle, eliminating troublemakers and silencing anyone asking inconvenient questions about missing Army medical supplies. As Matto carried Greta deeper into darkening forest, her breath formed small clouds against his throat, warm and rapid with pain. He located clean wind-packed snow and used it to pack her wound, then wrapped her tightly in his heavy coat before lifting her again. She reached out instinctively to steady the string of bone and turquoise beads at his shoulder, a warrior's ornament earned in raids against the Crow, offering silent gratitude that he pretended not to notice, though his arms tightened protectively. The storm was building rapidly, and Iron Hand Mackenzie remained somewhere behind them in gathering darkness, patient as winter itself. They desperately needed shelter within the hour, or the mountain would finish what the bounty hunter had started. October 15th, 1877, 8:45 p.m. The abandoned horizontal shaft at Ember Ridge opened into the mountainside like a wound that had never healed, its timber supports blackened by decades of seeping groundwater. Matto chose this refuge not because it offered safety, nowhere in this country could claim that, but because it provided the only substantial shelter within reach, and Greta's breathing had grown increasingly shallow during their desperate flight. Inside, the mine darkness pressed against them like a living thing. Matto extinguished his small fire and worked by touch, using his skinning knife to carefully split the sleeves of her chemise. The bullet had torn through her upper arm muscle, missing bone, but leaving a channel that continued to weep crimson. "This will cause considerable pain," he warned, pulling a thin willow twig from his medicine bundle and placing it between her teeth. Greta nodded, jaw already clenched. She watched without flinching as he heated his knife tip with flint sparks, then used the sterilized metal to probe the wound-clearing fabric fibers and debris. When he pushed the heated willow through torn flesh to drain the wound properly, she bit down hard on the leather strip, but made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. Tears leaked from her eyes, but her gaze never wavered from his face. "Your grandmother taught you well," she managed when he finished binding the wound with clean cloth strips. "She said healing was the other half of a warrior's training," he replied quietly. "Anyone can cause harm. Learning to repair it takes wisdom. And you, what brought you to walk alone in these mountains?" Matto's hands stilled on the bandage. For a moment, the only sound was water dripping somewhere in the tunnel depths. "Little Bighorn," he said finally. "I held my cousin as he died. Watched cavalry retreat. Later, I smothered grass fires to hide wounded warriors. You saved lives. I saved some, lost others." He secured the bandage with a careful knot. "The reservation afterward, endless counsels, broken promises. So I left. Grandmother's medicine was older than treaties anyway." Greta was quiet for a long moment. "Klaus, my husband, he believed America would be different from the old country. No kings, no wars over religion, just hard work and honest reward." She laughed bitterly. "Mine collapse took him 3 weeks after we arrived. I learned quickly that fairness was not guaranteed even in the promised land. You stayed. Where else could I go? I had 43 cents and a satchel of pressed flowers." She shifted position, wincing. "Besides these mountains, they teach you things. About yourself, about what you can endure." As he worked, Matto examined her satchel contents more carefully. The pressed plants and sketches were expected, but underneath lay rolled maps marked with surveyor's notations, German script in margins, and 3 folded letters sealed with blue wax. "These documents do not belong to you," he observed, holding up the correspondence. Greta's face flushed. "A chemist in St. Louis offered $20 to deliver them to a pharmacist in Fort Collins. I asked no questions because I desperately needed money to survive winter and establish a proper garden come spring." "What kind of chemist pays $20 for simple delivery?" "The kind who doesn't want his name associated with the contents, I suppose." She met his eyes. "I was desperate, Matto. 3 months alone in a ghost town trading willow bark tea for flower scraps. $20 meant survival." Outside, the shaft boots crunched on loose shale. Iron Hand Mackenzie had found their hideout and was moving with calculated patience. Matto quickly smeared charcoal around the entrance to mask their scent and used a pine bough to obliterate their tracks. "We move when wind provides cover." He breathed into her ear, his body pressed protectively against hers in the cramped tunnel. They waited in absolute silence, listening to Mackenzie's methodical search. The bounty hunter was taking his time examining every possible hiding place with thoroughness, born of years tracking fugitives across Western territories. "You know him," Greta whispered, barely audible. "By reputation. Iron Hand Mackenzie. Lost his right hand at Chancellorsville, replaced it with brass. They say he never misses a headshot." "Why is he hunting me?" "Those letters you carry. Someone wants them badly enough to hire the most expensive killer in the territory." When a particularly strong gust howled down from the peak's bending pines and drowning all other sounds, Maddow squeezed her shoulder once. They moved together through the storm toward the creek that ran black and swollen through the valley below. October 15th, 1877, 11:30 p.m. The creek ran like liquid obsidian between its banks, swollen with snowmelt and autumn rains that had turned the normally placid stream into a torrent capable of sweeping away anything unfortunate enough to fall into its icy embrace. They needed to cross this natural barrier to break Mackenzie's pursuit line, but the current would test every ounce of strength remaining in their exhausted bodies. Maddow waded in first, using a sturdy willow branch to probe the bottom, while frigid water climbed past his knees, then his waist, shocking his system with its intensity. The streambed consisted of smooth stones, made treacherous by moss shifting under his moccasins with each step. Satisfied that crossing was possible, he returned for Greta. "You must trust me completely," he said, wrapping one powerful arm around her waist while she clutched the precious satchel. The cold struck her like a physical blow, driving breath from her lungs and sending waves of agony through her wounded shoulder. "Great Scott!" she gasped unconsciously, adopting Silas's favorite expression. "It's like liquid ice." "Breathe steady," Maddow instructed, feeling her body rigid with shock. "The cold wants to steal your strength. Don't let it." Halfway across the torrent, her grip on the leather bag loosened, and she instinctively grabbed for his wrist, instead fingernails digging into his skin with desperate strength. The sudden weight shift sent him under the surface for a terrifying moment, boots dragging across gravel bottom while current tried to sweep them downstream into rocky rapids. He came up gasping creek water streaming from his hair, hauling both Greta and her satchel toward the far bank through sheer determination. They collapsed into willows on the opposite side bodies, shaking uncontrollably from cold and exhaustion. Behind them, rifle reports echoed across water as Mackenzie discovered their crossing point and began firing blind through brush, forcing them to crawl on bellies through mud that mixed their essence with creek water and decomposing leaves. "Can you continue?" Maddow asked, helping her to her feet. "Do I have a choice?" Greta's teeth chattered, but her voice carried determination. "That man will not stop hunting us, will he?" "Not until we're dead, or he is." She nodded grimly. "Then we had better make sure it's him." Dawn found them at Silas Boone's modest homestead, a collection of ramshackle structures built from salvaged lumber and sustained by stubborn optimism. The widower emerged from his blankets with startled expression, taking in their bedraggled condition with eyes that had witnessed too much hardship to be easily surprised. "Great Scott, you two look like you've been dragged through hell backwards," he said quietly, immediately checking shutters before warming stones by his small fire. "Saw a man with a brass hand ride past yesterday evening. Figured he was hunting something from the way he studied the ground." "Thank you for taking us in," Greta said, accepting the rough blanket he offered. "We have nowhere else to go." "Ain't much, but it's dry and warm. Coffee's mostly chicory, but it's hot." Silas busied himself with the fire, his movements economical and practiced. "That brass-handed fellow, he asked about you folks specifically." "What did you tell him?" Maddow asked. "Told him I mind my own business and suggested he do the same." Silas chuckled dryly. He didn't much care for that advice, but he rode on without pressing the matter. As Greta's fever began to climb, Maddow remained awake through the long night, dripping willow bark tea between her lips, and finally pulling her against his chest to share body heat. Her hair smelled of pine needles and medicinal herbs despite their ordeal, and he found himself studying the curve of her cheek in the firelight. "Tell me about your grandmother," she whispered during a lucid moment, her voice barely audible. "She was called Winona Firstborn Daughter. She could set bones, birth babies, prepare medicines that would bring the dead back from spirit world's edge." His voice grew soft with memory. "When I was small, she would take me to gather plants. Said the earth provided everything needed for healing, but you had to listen to learn which was which." She sounds wise. She said white man's medicine was like trying to fix a broken pot by painting over the cracks. Indian medicine went deeper, found the reason the pot broke in the first place. Greta was quiet for a while, her breathing gradually steadying against his chest. "Klaus used to say that in Germany they had doctors who understood plants like your grandmother. Before the universities, before the chemical medicines. Old women who knew secrets passed down through generations. What happened to them? Progress, Klaus called it. Modern medicine. Old ways became superstition overnight." She shifted slightly, her hand coming to rest over his heart. "But your grandmother's knowledge, it works. I can feel the willow tea easing the fever." "Knowledge is only as good as the hands that use it," Matto replied unconsciously, tightening his arms around her. "Grandmother always said healing required more than knowing which plants to pick. Required caring about the person you were trying to heal." In the growing dawn light, he studied the mysterious letters by firelight. The script was blocky German interspersed with columns of numbers, but the quality of paper and official seals suggested documents that powerful men might kill to possess or suppress. When Greta stirred against his shoulder, catching him examining her secrets, her face flushed with embarrassment and what appeared to be genuine shame. "If those papers contain something evil, we should burn them immediately," she whispered. "I can heal people with plants and knowledge, not with letters that bring bullets and death." "Perhaps," Matto said thoughtfully. "But men don't hire Iron Hand Mackenzie for $20. Whatever's in these letters, someone values them far more than your delivery fee. Or fears them more than the cost of hiring a killer." October 16, 1877, 2:15 p.m. They rode into Red Butte beneath a sky the color of tarnished pewter, the kind of gray that promised snow before nightfall. The town huddled in the valley bottom like sun-bleached bones, its single main street lined with buildings that had witnessed the rise and decline of the silver boom with equal indifference. Matto kept his Spencer rifle across his saddle, and his dark eyes constantly moving, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. Greta clutched her satchel and attempted to project the image of just another immigrant woman seeking medical attention, though tension in her shoulders betrayed underlying fear. Dr. Pike's clinic occupied a narrow building squeezed between the assay office and a shuttered saloon. The physician himself proved to be a spare man with surgeon's hands and tired eyes that came from treating too many injuries with insufficient supplies. "Let's have a look at this," Pike said gently, examining Greta's wound. His frown deepened as he discovered iron filings embedded in the torn flesh. "Whoever shot you wasn't using standard ammunition. These fragments don't match army issue or typical hunting loads." "What does that mean?" Greta asked. "Means someone's making their own bullets, probably adding metal shards for maximum damage. Nasty business." Pike carefully extracted fragments with surgical forceps. "You're lucky it went clean through. Another inch higher, and it would have shattered your shoulder blade." His examination was interrupted by his search for morphine to ease her discomfort. The clinic's medicine cabinet stood nearly empty shelves holding little more than bandages and hope. 4 separate shipments of medical supplies ordered through official army channels. Pike explained, frustration evident. "All marked U.S. Army Medical Department, all vanished somewhere between Railroad Depot and my door. Someone's running a very profitable operation. Any idea who? Matto asked. Suspicions aren't the same as proof. But I can tell you this much, whoever's doing it has connections high enough to intercept federal freight and low enough to let sick people suffer for profit. While Greta rested in the clinic's back room, Matto conducted careful reconnaissance of the town's commercial district. Behind the main livery stable, he discovered a freight wagon with faint blue scuffs in its paint, ghostly remains of stenciled letters someone had worked hard to eliminate. When he pried up a loose board from the wagon bed, straw dust with unmistakable medicinal odor of quinine spilled out, confirming his growing suspicions about missing medical supplies. We don't need strangers stirring up settled business. The voice belonged to Deputy Cal Boyd, a man whose badge reflected more light than his character could bear. He stood in the barn entrance with thumbs hooked in his gun belt, wearing the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Hand over that knife and the woman's bag, Boyd continued with false politeness. Town ordinance requires all weapons and suspicious packages be held for examination. Matto met his stare without blinking hand, resting casually near his knife handle. Show me this ordinance. Don't need to show you nothing, boy. Just need your cooperation with lawful authority. Lawful. Matto's voice carried just enough edge to make Boyd's hand drift toward his pistol. You mean like intercepting Army medical supplies? Boyd's face flushed. You best watch your mouth if you know what's good for you. I know exactly what's good for me. Question is whether you do. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, neither man willing to be first to break the standoff. Finally, Boyd stepped aside with a shrug that promised future trouble. Your choice, but this town has ways of encouraging cooperation from folks who don't play along. That evening, an alley confrontation behind the assay office left two of Lyle's hired men with split lips and loosened teeth, while Matto emerged with a bruised jaw, but the precious satchel still secure. The message was clear: they were not welcome, but also not easily intimidated. In the relative safety of the schoolhouse where Nora Talbot had provided shelter, Matto taught Greta the fundamentals of handling a Colt Navy revolver. Have you ever fired a weapon before? He asked, placing the heavy pistol in her hands. Klaus had an old musket for hunting rabbits. Nothing like this. This is different. Faster, more accurate, but also more dangerous. He stood behind her, his body warm and solid against her back, as he guided her hands to proper grip. Keep your finger away from the trigger until ready to shoot. Breathe out slow, squeeze gentle. Their shoulders touched as he demonstrated proper stance, and for a moment, the danger outside seemed less immediate than awareness crackling between them. Greta found herself leaning back against his strength, drawing comfort from his calm competence. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. You could have left me under that tree, walked away from all this trouble. Could have, he agreed, his breath stirring her hair. But I didn't. That's not an answer. Matto was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother used to say that the spirits put people in our path for reasons we don't always understand right away. Sometimes they need our help. Sometimes we need theirs. And which am I? Maybe both. The intimate moment was interrupted by Nora's return, with disturbing news from the streets. Dr. Pike had attempted to treat a miner's young son for a compound fracture, and without morphine for pain, the boy had bitten completely through a leather belt during bone setting. That's when your Blue Star extract proved its worth, Nora said to Greta. Boy went from screaming to sleeping peaceful as a baby. Doc Pike wants to know everything you can teach him about that flower. Meanwhile, Silas Boone faced his own crisis. The debt he owed Horace Lyle for spring seed money had come due, and Lyle was demanding payment in full or information about the Indian and the foreign woman, causing disruption in his carefully ordered community. When Silas refused to betray them, Lyle's enforcers delivered a message that left him with cracked ribs and clearer understanding of the stakes involved. "Consarn it all," Nora muttered as she wrapped the farmer's injuries. Time was when a man could speak his conscience without getting his bones broken. Her response to intimidation was characteristically direct. She posted a notice calling for a town meeting about missing medical supplies, and when Deputy Boyd tore it down, she nailed another higher on the post where he would need a ladder to reach it. "You're going to get yourself killed," Greta warned. "These men don't seem to value human life very highly." "Then it's time someone reminded them that human life has value," Nora replied firmly. "I've been teaching these children that education and courage can change the world. Time I proved, I believe it myself." As pieces of a larger puzzle began fitting together, Maddo and Greta found themselves moving in unconscious harmony, anticipating each other's needs, sharing tools without being asked, exchanging glances that spoke of growing trust and something deeper. But time was running short. Iron Hand Mackenzie remained somewhere in the darkness beyond town borders, patient as death itself, and Horace Lyle's operation was proving far more extensive and dangerous than any of them had suspected. October 17, 1877, 1:30 a.m. Breaking into Horace Lyle's office required military precision. The window latch had been painted over so many times that it took Maddo's knife blade and considerable patience to work it free without alerting the night watchman. They slipped inside just after midnight, Maddo, Greta, and Silas, the injured farmer, insisting he was healthy enough to help, despite protests about his cracked ribs. "Place reeks like a den of thieves," Silas whispered, wrinkling his nose at the mixture of expensive cigar tobacco and imported whiskey that permeated the air. The office walls were decorated with mining certificates and territorial maps marked with red ink annotations. Ledgers sat stacked beside a massive iron safe, their pages filled with shipping manifests, freight tallies, and detailed records of Lyle's various business enterprises. "Look at this," Maddo said quietly, pointing to regular payments marked IM. Each entry was accompanied by a distinctive thumbprint pressed into the ink. "Iron Hand Mackenzie isn't just hired muscle, he's a full partner." But as Maddo studied the correspondence more carefully, he found something that made his stomach tighten with apprehension. A telegram dated 3 months earlier bore a signature that explained everything. I, Mackenzie Lyle. "What is it?" Greta asked, seeing his expression change. "Iron Hand isn't just working for Horace Lyle. He's Horace Lyle's younger brother working under their mother's maiden name." "Brothers," Silas breathed. "That explains why he's hunting you so personal-like. This ain't just business anymore." Greta spread her mysterious letters across Lyle's mahogany desk, comparing them to a hastily scrawled cipher key she discovered in the desk blotter. The handwriting matched, and gradually the coded messages began revealing their secrets. "These aren't medical supply manifests," she said, her voice tight with growing horror. "They're geological surveys. Water sources, fault lines, underground springs, all mapped with scientific precision." "Water rights." Silas immediately grasped the implications. "Whoever controls water up at Ember Ridge can process 10 times more ore than current operations. They could strip that entire mountain to bedrock." But the true horror lay in a leather portfolio marked Personnel Confidential. Inside were labor contracts and termination schedules that revealed the full scope of Lyle's operation. 22 names, Greta read, her voice barely audible. Mostly Mexican and Chinese workers listed for permanent relocation next Monday. "They're not being relocated," Maddo said grimly. "They're being eliminated. These men built the underground infrastructure for hydraulic mining. This method, imported from the California fields of the 1850s-60s, was being experimentally applied here by investors seeking to move Western technology inland. When their work is complete, they become witnesses that need silencing." A handbill underneath the ledgers made the timeline official. Notice of expanded operations. Ember Ridge, Hydraulic Mining Venture H. This method, imported from the California fields of the 1850s-60s, was being experimentally applied here by investors seeking to move Western technology inland. Lyle, managing partner. I, Mackenzie, security director. Monday, Silas said. That's 4 days from now. They almost escaped with evidence intact. Greta had used a copying frame and graphite rubbing kit from her satchel to copy the most damning documents, and they were preparing to slip away when Silas, weakened by his injuries, accidentally knocked a heavy ledger off the desk. The crash brought a security guard running with lantern and sawed-off shotgun. Greta immediately snuffed their light, plunging the office into darkness, while Maddow took the man down with a sleeper hold that left him unconscious but breathing. "We need to move," Maddow said, helping Silas to his feet. "More guards will come." They escaped through the rear window, past crates stacked against the building's back wall, crates clearly stenciled U.S. Army Medical and poorly concealed beneath horse feed sacks. As they made their way through Red Butte's deserted streets, Greta found Maddow's hand in the darkness. Her fingers were cold but steady, and when their eyes met in pale starlight, something passed between them that transcended shared danger. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I want you to know meeting you was the best thing to come from this nightmare." "We're not finished yet," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Those men in the mine don't deserve to die for Lyle's greed." "No, they don't. But how can 2 people, 3, counting Silas, stop something this big?" "Same way water cuts through stone," Maddow said. "Drop by drop until the whole mountain comes down." But even as they reached the schoolhouse, Iron Hand Mackenzie was preparing for the final phase of his brother's plan. The bounty hunter intended to ride for Ember Ridge before dawn and eliminate the illegal workers with carefully placed dynamite charges burying the evidence along with the men who possessed it. October 17, 1877, 9:45 a.m. Deputy Boyd arrested Maddow outside Morrison's General Store on fabricated charges that everyone in town recognized as transparently false. The accusation of horse theft was based on Boyd's claim that Maddow's paint pony matched description of an animal stolen from a ranch 60 miles south, a story so thin it wouldn't hold water, but legal enough to serve its purpose. "This is harassment." Greta stormed into the jail with Nora at her side, blue eyes blazing with righteous fury. "You have no legitimate cause to hold this man." Boyd lounged in his chair with calculated insolence boots propped on his desk. "Well now, miss, I might be inclined to consider your request. Of course, it would help considerably if you handed over that leather bag for official examination." "I have violated no territorial laws." "That's for me to determine, ain't it?" Boyd's smile revealed teeth that had seen better decades. "Naturally, if you'd prefer to leave your Indian friend in that cell while you reconsider." "You're being paid to do this," Nora said suddenly. "How much is Lyle giving you to betray your own community?" Boyd's face flushed. "You best watch your mouth, schoolmarm. Teaching children is one thing. Teaching adults to disrespect lawful authority is another entirely." "Lawful authority?" Nora's voice dripped contempt. "When did stealing Army medical supplies become lawful?" Through the jail's single window, Silas Boone could be seen hitching his ancient mule to a rickety buckboard loading supplies that suggested he was planning a journey. The farmer caught Greta's eye and nodded grimly. Whatever desperate gamble they were preparing, he was ready to sacrifice everything. "You know what's happening up at Ember Ridge," Greta said to Boyd. 22 men are going to die unless someone stops it." 22 foreigners who shouldn't be in this country anyway, Boyd replied callously. "Territory's better off without them. And you can live with that, with being part of mass murder. I can live with a lot of things for the right price." Nora created the distraction they needed by staging a genuine commotion in the street. What began as a complaint about missing school supplies rapidly escalated into a shouting match involving several miners' wives about the broader pattern of theft plaguing their community. In the resulting chaos, Greta managed to slip lockpicks through the cell bars to Matto tools she had learned to use during desperate months of survival in the ghost town. "Can you use these?" she whispered. "My grandmother taught me many skills," he replied. "Some for healing, some for surviving." The jailbreak proceeded smoothly until Iron Hand Mackenzie arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule, his brass prosthetic gleaming in morning sunlight like a weapon in its own right. Gunfire erupted along the boardwalk as Silas deliberately drew the bounty hunter's attention with a decoy rifle propped on his wagon seat. "What the hell you think you're doing, old man?" Mackenzie shouted, his Winchester trained on Silas. "What needs doing?" Silas replied calmly, despite the bullet that had torn through his left side. "What should have been done weeks ago?" The old farmer drove his buckboard directly across the main street, creating a physical barrier that blocked Mackenzie's line of sight and bought precious seconds for the others to escape. "Go on, get..." Silas gasped, his weathered hands clutching the wagon's side as crimson spread across his shirt. "Finish what we started." Matto started toward the wounded farmer, but Silas grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No, son. This is my choice. You make it count." Mackenzie's next shot took Silas high in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him against the schoolhouse steps. As life faded from his eyes, the farmer's last words were for Nora, who knelt beside him. "Tell them all," he whispered. "Tell them Silas Boone picked the right side when it mattered." Nora closed his eyes with infinite gentleness, then rose to face the crowd gathering around the scene. Deputy Boyd had vanished the moment shooting started, taking his badge and cowardice with him. "Any of you men want to help me carry him inside?" she asked, her voice steady, despite tears streaming down her cheeks. "Silas Boone deserves better than dying in the street like a dog." Greta's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice carried forged steel when she turned to Matto. "We finish this business. For him and for everyone else they've hurt." They rode hard through gathering storm toward Ember Ridge Mackenzie, somewhere behind them in pursuit, while the town of Red Butte struggled to comprehend that the quiet farmer who had asked for nothing had given his life to offer them all a chance at justice. October 17, 1877, 11:30 p.m. The wind at Ember Ridge cut through clothing like sharpened steel driving snow, with enough force to blind anyone foolish enough to face it directly. The abandoned mining camp clung to the mountainside like broken teeth, its buildings dark except for warm glow of lanterns around the main shaft, where Lyle's security force had established their base. 8 men, maybe 9. Matto counted, studying the perimeter through his grandfather's war glass. Arranged defensive, but they're not expecting real trouble. "They're about to get it," Greta said grimly, checking the revolver he had taught her to use. Her hands were steady now, no longer trembling with fear, but focused with purpose. "I'll take the sentries," Matto said, checking his ammunition with methodical care. "You reach those powder kegs by the supply sled and make sure they can't detonate the shaft." "What if they spot me?" "Then you run like hell and don't look back." She met his eyes in the starlight. "I'm not leaving you." "Greta." "No." Her voice was firm. "We started this together. We finish it together." They separated into howling darkness, Matto circling wide to approach guard positions from upslope, while Greta crawled toward the supply area, where wooden kegs of blasting powder sat ready for Mackenzie's final solution. The first sentry never detected Matto's approach. He rose from snow-covered undergrowth like a hunting cat, one powerful arm encircling the man's throat, while his other hand covered the guard's mouth. The struggle was brief and silent. But the second guard had better instincts. He spotted movement at the edge of his vision and opened his mouth to shout a warning. Matto's thrown knife took him in the throat before sound could emerge. The man toppled backward into the snow weapon unfired, but his fall knocked over a stack of metal ore buckets with a crash that rang across the camp like a dinner bell. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted from the main fire. "Probably just wind," another voice replied, but footsteps were already approaching their position. Greta reached the powder magazines, just as shouts erupted from multiple directions. Working by feel in freezing darkness, she stuffed handfuls of wet snow around the fuses of 3 wooden kegs, the moisture soaking into powder and reducing the risk of accidental detonation. A guard rounded the corner of a supply shed and spotted her crouched beside the explosives. "Hey, what do you think you're—" Matto's rifle shot cut off his challenge, the bullet catching the man's center mass and dropping him like a stone. But the muzzle flash had revealed their positions, and suddenly the entire camp was alive with movement and shouting. "There by the powder! Get the bastards! Don't let them reach the mine!" Rifle fire erupted from multiple positions as remaining guards spread out to locate their attackers. Muzzle flashes strobed through darkness like deadly lightning, illuminating swirling snow and casting bizarre shadows between abandoned buildings. "This way," Matto called to Greta, gesturing toward a fallen log that offered cover from the withering crossfire. They dove behind the timber just as bullets began chewing splinters from its surface. The guards were spreading out now, trying to flank their position, and ammunition was running low. "How many shots do you have left?" Greta asked, having to shout over the sound of gunfire. 6, you 4. "Then we better make them count. You have cost me considerable money and professional reputation." The voice emerged from swirling snow like death itself, cold and measured as winter wind. "Iron Hand." Mackenzie stepped into flickering light of the guard fires, his brass prosthetic reflecting orange glow like a weapon forged in hell's furnaces. His Winchester was rock steady in his good hand, and his eyes held the flat emptiness of a man who had killed so many times that taking life required no more emotional effort than swatting flies. "Should have minded your own business instead of interfering with family enterprises." He continued working the rifle's lever action with mechanical precision. "Now it ends here in the snow like it should have 3 days ago. Your brother's business involves murdering innocent workers." Greta called back, her voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "We couldn't let that happen." "Innocent." Mackenzie laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "They're illegal immigrants who knew the risks when they took Horace's money. Their deaths serve a greater purpose." "What purpose lining your pockets with stolen gold? Building something permanent, something that will last." His voice carried the fervor of a true believer. "This territory needs strong men willing to make hard choices. Horace and I are those men." The gunfight that followed was brief, vicious, and conducted at ranges where missing meant dying. Bullets whined through air like angry hornets, striking sparks from metal equipment and sending splinters flying from wooden structures. Matto felt the burn of a bullet creasing his ribs, stumbled and rolled behind a pile of ore tailings with Greta pressed close beside him. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and rapidly running low on ammunition. "The mine," he gasped, blood soaking through his shirt. "We run for the mine." "You're hit." "I can move. Can you—" She nodded, though her face was pale with fear and cold. "Together. Together." They broke from cover, simultaneously sprinting across open ground, while bullets whined around them like deadly wasps. The tunnel entrance yawned before them like the mouth of some primordial beast, its ancient timber supports black with decades of moisture and decay. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of rotting wood and something worse, poisonous gases that collected in abandoned workings and could kill as efficiently as any bullet. Their lantern flames guttered sickeningly in the foul atmosphere, providing barely enough light to navigate treacherous footing. Somewhere in the depths ahead, they could hear voices, the illegal workers Mackenzie intended to eliminate permanently. "Everyone out!" Matto shouted into darkness, his words echoing from tunnel walls. "All of you move toward the entrance now." "¿Qué pasa?" came a frightened voice from the shadows. "¿Quiénes con friends?" Greta called in her limited Spanish. "Amigos, danger, peligro." You must leave. Tienes que irte. The workers shuffled toward daylight, like men emerging from their own graves, eyes wide with terror and confusion. Most spoke no English, but they understood urgency in her voice and the sound of gunfire echoing from the shaft entrance. As the terrified laborers fled into the storm, Matto and Greta pushed deeper into the mountain's bowels, following tunnel branches that grew narrower and more unstable with each turn. Behind them, Mackenzie's breathing grew increasingly labored as poisonous air worked its deadly magic on his lungs. The brass prosthetic scraped against tunnel walls with every step, throwing sparks that danced dangerously close to pockets of accumulated methane gas. The metallic screech was like fingernails dragged across slate, a sound that set their teeth on edge and announced his position with every movement. Can't. Run. Forever. Mackenzie's voice echoed from behind them, distorted by the tunnel acoustics and his own growing exhaustion. Don't have to, Matto called back. Just have to run farther than you can follow. They reached the final excavation chamber just as the mountain began to voice its displeasure. Lyle's workers had cut a narrow shaft toward an underground water source marked on Greta's geological surveys, and liquid was beginning to seep through hairline cracks in fractured rock. The engineering was amateur work, dangerous work held together by greed rather than professional competence. Water pressure behind the compromised stone was building toward catastrophic failure that would flood the entire tunnel system. Look at this, Greta said, studying the makeshift excavation. They've undermined the whole structural foundation. One good shock and this entire section will collapse. Matto spotted the critical support timber that maintained structural integrity for this section of the mine and made a decision that could kill them all. Seizing a discarded mining sledge, he began hammering at the key-beam with methodical precision. "What are you doing?" Greta asked, though she already knew the answer. "Ending it," he replied, each blow sending shockwaves through the unstable excavation. "All of it." The timber cracked, groaned under impossible stress, and finally surrendered with a sound like thunder rolling through stone corridors. Rock and rotten wood cascaded from the ceiling, blocking the tunnel behind them and trapping Mackenzie somewhere in darkness beyond the collapse. But the cave-in also ruptured the underground water source completely. The tunnel began filling with ice-cold mountain runoff that rose from ankle-deep to knee-deep within minutes. They could hear Mackenzie shouting from beyond the rockfall, his voice muffled by tons of fallen stone and rising water. He was injured, possibly trapped, certainly going to drown if the flood continued at its current pace. Through a gap in the debris, Matto had a clear shot that would end Mackenzie's suffering quickly and cleanly. The bounty hunter was family to Horace Lyle, but he was also a killer who had murdered innocent people for money. "Do it," Greta said quietly, understanding what he was considering. "It's mercy at this point." Matto took the shot. The rifle's report echoed through the flooded tunnel like a funeral bell tolling. There would be no more hunting, no more innocents caught in Mackenzie's deadly games, no more family reunions between the Lyle brothers. "It's finished," he said. They ran then, splashing through water that climbed steadily toward their waists, lungs burning from poisonous air and physical exertion. Behind them, the mountain continued its collapse, sealing the illegal mining operation under tons of stone and twisted timber. They hauled the final worker between them, a Mexican boy who couldn't have been more than 17, as the tunnel filled with sounds of grinding stone and rushing water. The kid's weight was distributed between Matto's powerful shoulders and Greta's determined grip. Outside, the powder kegs finally ignited despite Greta's efforts to neutralize them. The explosion lit the night sky like a miniature sun and sent a pillar of steam and debris climbing toward the stars. The blast collapsed remaining tunnel entrances and buried Horace Lyle's criminal enterprise under an avalanche that would take decades to excavate. Matto threw himself over Greta as debris rained from above his body, forming a shield that absorbed the impact of falling rocks and metal fragments. She pressed her face against his neck, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady against her cheek, while the mountain shuddered and settled into its new configuration. When echoes finally faded into silence, they found themselves alone on the mountainside, with 22 rescued workers and smoking ruins of what had been Ember Ridge mining camp. The storm was breaking at last, and first pale light of dawn was beginning to show beyond eastern peaks. "Is it over?" Greta asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. "It's over," Matto confirmed, helping her to her feet. "All of it." October 18th, 1877, 7:20 a.m. Morning arrived with a sky scrubbed clean by the storm and distant sound of horses climbing the mountain trail at steady pace. Dr. Pike had sent his telegram to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne the previous evening, and now a column of federal officers wound their way up treacherous path to investigate what remained of Horace Lyle's operation. The evidence proved overwhelming even to skeptical lawmen accustomed to wild stories from mining camps. Ledgers recovered from office ruins detailed every aspect of the illegal enterprise, from systematic theft of Army medical supplies to planned elimination of witness laborers. "Never seen anything quite like this," Marshal Henderson said, studying the photographic evidence Greta had captured. "Systematic criminal conspiracy reaching from St. Louis to territorial government. Heads are going to roll in Denver when this gets out." The rescued workers, warmed by military blankets and strong coffee, told their stories through interpreters who translated tales of forced labor and systematic abuse. The physical evidence corroborated every accusation: illegal excavations, stolen government property, and a mass grave that had been intended for 22 innocent men. "What will happen to them?" Greta asked, watching the workers receive medical attention from Army medics. "Those who want to stay can apply for legal residency," Henderson replied. "Territory needs good workers, and these men have certainly earned their place here. Those who want to return home will receive transportation and compensation for their ordeal." Horace Lyle was discovered in his private office, slumped over his mahogany desk, beside an empty bottle of laudanum and a suicide note that blamed his downfall on foreign agitators and savage interference with legitimate business practices. The mine owner had chosen poison over a federal prison cell. Deputy Cal Boyd was found attempting to flee on the Denver stage, his saddlebags stuffed with gold coins and bearer bonds. Federal marshals arrested him at the first relay station, where his nervous behavior and obvious wealth had already attracted suspicious attention from other passengers. 23 years on the frontier, Marshal Henderson said, shaking his head as Boyd was led away in shackles. "Never fails to amaze me how some men will sell their souls for pieces of silver." Iron Hand Mackenzie's body was recovered from the flooded tunnel system 3 days later, the brass prosthetic that had given him his nickname tarnished black by mountain water. The territorial coroner ruled the death accidental drowning during the mine collapse, which was close enough to truth for official purposes. Dr. Pike stitched Matto's bullet graze with practiced hands and quiet professionalism. "You did well, son. Both of you. This territory owes you a debt that can't be repaid in money." His medicine cabinet was finally restocked with legitimate supplies bearing proper government seals instead of black market stamps that had marked Lyle's stolen goods. Greta spent the afternoon organizing her botanical specimens, many damaged by their ordeal, but still scientifically valuable. Her pressed Blue Star flowers had proven their medicinal worth during the crisis, and Dr. Pike was eager to learn everything she could teach about their alkaloid properties and proper preparation methods. "I'd like to establish a formal partnership," Pike said. "Your knowledge combined with modern medical training could help people throughout this territory. Interested in staying in Red Butte permanently?" As she worked, Matto sat nearby, carefully reshaping the handle of his skinning knife and stealing frequent glances at her bent head. The awareness between them had deepened during their shared trials, seasoned by mutual dependence and the kind of trust that only came from facing death together. They walked together to the grove where they had first met autumn light, filtering through pine branches that no longer concealed hidden gunmen or threat of sudden violence. The silence between them was comfortable, now filled with understanding rather than uncertainty. "I intended to walk on after Little Bighorn," Matto said finally, his voice carrying weight of decisions made and paths chosen. "No more battles, no more involvement in white men's wars. I intended to plant a medicinal garden and live quietly," Greta replied, her accent softening the English words. "No more adventures, no more dangers beyond winter weather and crop failures." They looked at each other with recognition that both intentions had changed forever during their time together. The woman who had wanted only to tend herbs in peaceful isolation was gone, replaced by someone who had helped destroy a criminal conspiracy. The warrior who had sought to avoid conflicts between races had discovered that some battles transcended the color of a person's skin. "Dr. Pike offered me a partnership," she said. "Stay in Red Butte, establish a proper clinic with modern equipment and traditional plant medicine working together. And I told him I needed to discuss it with someone first." Matto smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "What did you want to discuss?" "Whether you'd be staying too." "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want me to stay." She stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. "I want you to stay," she said simply. "Not because I need protection anymore, but because I can't imagine facing whatever comes next without you." He covered her hand with his own calloused fingers, gentle against her smooth skin. "Then I'll stay." October 19th, 1877, 2:00 p.m. They buried Silas Boone on a gentle rise above his fields, where he could look down eternally on the river bottom he had worked so hard to cultivate from unforgiving clay. His ancient mule stood at the edge of the gravesite, occasionally pawing earth with patient sorrow of an animal that understood loss better than most humans. The entire town had come to pay respects, miners and their families, shopkeepers, even some of the rescued Mexican workers who had never met Silas, but recognized the courage he represented. Nora had organized the service, her voice steady, despite tears, as she read from a letter Silas had written to his late wife. "Martha," she read aloud, "if you're reading this, then I've gone to join you at last. Don't worry about the farm, I've made arrangements. But I wanted you to know that I finally found something worth fighting for again. Worth dying for, if it comes to that. Remember how we used to talk about making the world a little better than we found it? Well, I think I managed that in the end." Matto spoke simply of a farmer who had chosen conscience over safety, who had stood against armed men because his moral center demanded nothing less. The words carried across wind to the modest crowd gathered on the hillside. "He was a good man who lived by his principles," Matto concluded. "The earth is richer for having held him, and we are all better for having known him." Greta placed a small bunch of blue star flowers at the headstone, their deep blue petals bright against gray granite marker that the townspeople had commissioned from pooled savings. The gesture was simple, but meaningful: life honoring death, beauty marking sorrow, hope planted in soil of grief. "He saved us all," she said quietly. "If he hadn't blocked that street, given us time to escape—" "He knew what he was doing," Nora replied. "Silas always said a man's life was only worth what he was willing to spend it on. He spent his well." Returning to Red Butte, they found a community already beginning to heal from trauma of recent events. Greta and Dr. Pike established a medicinal garden on a patch of army land that the territorial government had designated for public use, planting it with specimens from her collection and native remedies that Matto knew by scent season and traditional application. "The blue star flowers are taking root beautifully," Pike observed, examining the transplanted specimens. "Have you considered writing a comprehensive guide to mountain plant medicine, something that could be distributed to other frontier doctors?" Perhaps, Greta replied, looking to Matto. But it would need to include traditional Lakota knowledge as well. This isn't just European botany, it's something new, something that combines the best of both worlds. Nora expanded her educational programs to include the miners' wives, teaching them practical skills like preparing willow bark for fever reduction and proper wound cleaning techniques. Knowledge was power, she insisted with characteristic determination, and power shared among good people made entire communities stronger. "We're going to build something lasting here," she told Greta, as they watched children playing around the clinic garden. "Something that honors what Silas died for." The rescued workers found legitimate employment, rebuilding what the town desperately needed: a new clinic porch that wouldn't collapse under accumulated snow, a proper school roof that actually kept out rain, and a bridge over the creek that would survive spring flooding. They worked for honest wages paid in genuine coin, rather than company script, their skilled labor creating something better than what had existed before. Several chose to remain in Red Butte, permanently adding their own cultural traditions to a community, slowly learning the value of diversity. The greatest surprise came from an unexpected source buried deep in Lyle's business records. Among geological surveys and mining claims, Dr. Pike discovered a water-stained envelope containing more than criminal evidence. It held legal documents that would change everything. Inside was a warranty deed from 1869, showing that Horace Lyle had purchased only upper elevations of Ember Ridge. The lower slopes, including the pine grove where Greta had first fallen wounded, lay within a narrow tract that had been withdrawn from public sale under an obscure treaty amendment. The amendment bore a signature mark that made Matto go completely still when he recognized it. His grandmother's traditional name, recorded by a missionary clerk who had witnessed treaty signing in 1868. The document protected a sacred spring that had been used by Lakota families during seasonal hunts for countless generations. "This is legal?" Marshal Henderson asked, examining the faded documents. "Federal law recognizes this treaty." "Federal law is clear on treaty obligations," Pike replied. "This land cannot be sold, mined, or developed without tribal consent." Matto did not claim ownership in the European sense of absolute possession and control. Instead, he requested seasonal harvesting rights for medicinal plants and permission to teach others about proper gathering techniques, knowledge that belonged to no single person, but to all who would use it wisely. "I'd like to establish a teaching center," he said. "Somewhere people can learn about traditional plant medicine, both Lakota and European methods. The knowledge shouldn't die with the people who carry it." Greta signed as witness to the formal agreement, her careful European script next to his traditional mark on documents that would protect the grove for generations. Marshal Henderson nodded approvingly, more impressed by their restraint and wisdom than any legal argument could have achieved. October 20th, 1877, 6:30 p.m. They did not marry in the territorial courthouse or exchange formal vows before a traveling preacher. Marriage, as defined by territorial law, was a white institution designed for white people, and they had moved beyond need for such artificial constraints. Instead, on the evening of the first hard frost, when ice crystals formed lace patterns on clinic windows, Matto appeared at Greta's door, carrying a stack of clean willow bark and a buffalo robe that had belonged to his grandmother. The bark would provide medicine through winter months, while the robe offered warmth during coldest nights. "These are beautiful," Greta said, running her fingers over the intricate beadwork that decorated the robe's edge. "Your grandmother made this for her wedding ceremony 60 years ago. She would have wanted it to be used again for something good." Greta answered his gesture with a clay jar of salve made from blue star flowers, and a smile that began uncertain but grew confident when he said simply, "I will remain through winter. Come spring, you will need assistance planting the larger garden beds." "Just through winter?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. Well, he said, his own smile growing, perhaps longer. The teaching center will take several seasons to establish properly. She nodded, understanding flowing between them like a river finding its course. When he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, with fingers that were gentle, despite all the violence they had committed, no additional words were necessary. "There's something I need to tell you," she said suddenly. "About those letters, the ones that started all this trouble." "What about them?" "I wasn't completely honest about why I took the delivery job. It wasn't just desperation for money." She looked down at her hands. "The chemist in St. Louis, he was Klaus's cousin Wilhelm. He knew I was alone struggling to survive. The $20 was his way of helping without making it seem like charity. And the letters, real geological surveys like we discovered. But Wilhelm didn't know what they contained. He was just helping a colleague move confidential business documents. Neither of us realized we were getting involved in something so dangerous." "Does it matter now?" "I don't know. Does it?" Mato considered this for a moment. "My grandmother used to say that the spirits often use innocent actions to create necessary outcomes. Perhaps Wilhelm's kindness and your need for survival brought us together for reasons neither of you could have foreseen. Do you believe that?" "I believe we found each other when we both needed finding. Everything else is just details." They worked through the bitter mountain winter, carrying water buckets in matched rhythm, while schoolchildren played games around the clinic garden despite the snow. Their partnership had evolved into something deeper than romantic love. It was a meeting of complementary strengths, European botanical knowledge combined with Native American plant wisdom. When spring arrived with its promise of renewal, they planted together with focused intensity of people who understood that growing things required patience, attention, and faith in the future. Greta brought her scientific precision and careful record-keeping, while Mato contributed generational knowledge about soil preparation, proper timing, and which plants thrived in mountain conditions. The blue star flowers bloomed early that season, their petals opening like small pieces of captured sky against dark mountain earth. Children from the school visited the garden regularly, learning names of healing plants in 3 languages, English, German, and Lakota, as part of Nora's expanded curriculum. "They're calling it the Boone Memorial Garden," Nora announced one afternoon, finding them working among the herb beds. "Town council voted unanimously. Thought you should know." "He would have liked that," Greta said, wiping soil from her hands. "A garden that helps people, grows medicine, teaches children. It's exactly what he would have wanted his memory to support." On quiet evenings, when the day's work was finished and mountain air carried the scent of growing things, Greta and Mato would stand together overlooking the valley where they had fought for justice and found each other. The ghost town of Ember Ridge lay hidden beneath new forest growth, its scars slowly healing under carpets of wildflowers and young pine trees. Greta kept her leather satchel and continued adding to her botanical collection, but she no longer traveled alone or lived in isolation. Mato retained his rifle and traditional beads, but he no longer walked the path of a solitary warrior seeking escape from an unjust world. They had discovered something rarer than gold or silver in these mountains, a partnership built on mutual respect, tested by shared danger, and strong enough to bridge the gap between cultures that history claimed could never coexist peacefully. The wind through the pines sang their approval each evening, and the mountain kept their love safe in its ancient heart, where it would endure long after the last mine shaft collapsed and the final mining town returned to wilderness. In the garden, they tended together. Blue star flowers bloomed year after year, their medicinal properties bringing healing to anyone who needed it, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. It was a legacy worth building, worth protecting, worth the price they had paid to create it. And in the quiet moments between sunrise and sunset, when the light was perfect and the world seemed balanced on the edge of possibility, they knew they had chosen well.